Hi, this is Ben Proco in Bike Training and Racing with Power. This is the part 3 of our 3-part series. The first one went over how do I get started, and then we did where do I want to go, and now we're going to work on how do I get there. At the conclusion of this video, we'll have at the bottom in the comments, we'll have the other videos available there. So if you need to catch up, that is completely fine. But let's go right in to how do I get there? All right, how do you get there? And I'm going to cover a little bit of the long course, short course, triathlon, mountain bike, road race, and healthy riding for each one of these. All right, first thing you got to do is build a base. In the first part, I talked about establishing your training zones, and then we went on to more specific things in the next video. But the main thing about building a base is just aim for the middle of zone 2. Unless you want to get super complicated, again, if you do some more of the higher end testing, you could aim, they might be able to tell you go for lower zone 2 or even go for zone 1 for a while to build a base, but just essentially aim for zone 2. And one of the key things, don't look at average power for determining that. Like, let's say your zone 2, and I'm just making this up, is from 150 to 200 watts, which is a pretty decent zone 2. That'd probably be someone who's already riding, but don't aim for averaging 199 watts for that zone 2 ride. Just aim for the middle. And again, don't even use the average of that. Like if you see your average is 175, don't worry about that. Try to just spend as much time in that zone. And many of the programs will be able to tell you how long you spent in that zone. So this is why I really like doing trainer rides. You can really just dial in that zone 2. And this is where I see a lot of people when they're starting off. They're doing a lot of group rides. And then they get into zone 3 and zone 4, and they'll spend only 20 to 30% of their training time in zone 2. Well, they're not able to build a base, and it's the most important time to build a base is when you're starting off. And this goes for any of these durations, whether you're doing long, short distance tries, mountain bike, road race, or just riding for health. Build up that base. So once you've built the base, and let's say you're doing 3 workouts a week, one of those workouts could be focused on building your FTP. This is the main thing. Again, without getting into individualized coaching, building FTP is probably the thing I see with beginner athletes as their biggest issue. Not necessarily with experienced athletes. This is where it gets a little bit different, but most people just starting out need to build FTP. And this is done by going in zone 4. You can go upper zone 4, lower zone 4, but just try to be in zone 4. There are things where you can get specific and try to pull your FTP up. You can push it up, but again, that's getting a little bit more advanced on that. So example, this would be doing 3 intervals for 10 minutes. I see a lot of people do what they're calling these, their zone 4 workouts, and they're going for 2 or 3 minutes in zone 4 and then resting a minute and then 2 or 3 more minutes. And it's really not long enough time. You need to be getting like at least 10 minutes in zone 4, unless maybe you're doing like a zone 5A like FTP. You might be able to go a little bit less, but most of these intervals need to be at least 10 minutes. Then you can progress to 2x20, 3x15, and so on. Some people I just see, they're building their FTP, and then they just keep on doing like 2x20 over and over and over and over again, and then they wonder why they stagnate. You need to kind of change it up a little bit and try to build from that. All right, after that, you've worked on your base, you've been working on your FTP, you just need to go longer. So spending more time in those training zones, making your longer ride even longer. If you're doing 2 or 3 hours, start moving up to 4 or 5. Even if you're doing shorter distance triathlons, you can work up to doing 3-hour rides. That's going to have some benefit for you there. And then definitely with the mountain biking and road racing, You know, your road races, even your Cat 4 or 5s are doing races that are about 2 hours long, and some of them even longer. It's going to come to, you don't want to just make it 2 hours. You need to feel great at 2 hours. So again, spending more time in those specific training zones. Look at your totals. See if you're getting more time in zone 2, and then also look at that zone 4 time. Are you getting even more time in zone 4? It's a tighter range with zone 4, so you're going to have a little bit of, if you're like analyzing it, you're going to see a little bit pop into zone 3 and a little bit go into zone 5A or 6 or whatever it is, however it's defined. But just try to get more overall time in there. Now you're getting closer to your race. You need to start going for the specific demands of your race. So let's say you are doing a short distance triathlon. Well, you've been working on your FTP. That's a great spot because that's probably where you're going to be racing. I could say you could practice coming out of corners a little bit higher intensity, but again, that's probably not going to matter. You're only going to spike up to probably 150% your FTP for a few seconds. You just shouldn't be crushing it out of a corner. Now, if you were doing ITU style, that would be a whole different thing. ITU style is more like doing a road bike race, the draft legal racing, and then being able to run. But there is specific demands for long course triathlon. Could be spending more time in zone 3. I see, you know, if you're doing a half Ironman, you probably want to get some zone 3 work in before the event because you're probably going to spend some time there. You know, that's 75, 80%. You just need to get used to going there for a little bit longer time. But you don't want to spend all your time in zone 3. And then if you're doing an Ironman, you might throw some zone 3 in there. There's times where that's beneficial. But again, that's all part of kind of periodization, and I'm trying to keep things very general for anyone who wants that to just get the most out of these videos. So that was race specific intensity. If your race has some climbs, you want to practice your shifting for that. Essentially, climbing is just power to weight ratio. You could climb. I see people say, I did great on the climbs on this hilly triathlon, but man, I was dead for the run. Well, you probably didn't do great on the climbs because you were burning too many matches. Part of the reason of having a power meter is you can really set your limits on the climbs. I see a lot of people when I'm doing some hilly triathlons, and I'm decent on the bike, but I'll see the first quarter of that climb, like if you go to Lubbock, they're not monstrous climbs, but they do take a minute or two to go up. Probably those first 15 to 30 seconds, I see people, they'll be passing me by on the climb, but once, and that's early on in the race, but once we get about halfway through, I'm blowing by them, and all I'm doing is keeping my power steady. I might be shooting for, let's say 200 watts when I'm just riding out at Lubbock. And then when I go up on a climb, I might shoot for 220, 225, just a little bit higher, not quite at my threshold or anything, but just going a little bit higher because that's just the best way to race. When you're going up hills, you want to add a little bit. When you're going down hills, you can dial it back a little bit. But having a power meter essentially flattens out the course. You wouldn't sprint in the middle of a marathon, and nor should you do that with a long distance triathlon and just climb the hill as fast as you can. That makes no sense. But I do see people do that where they might be aiming for 200 watts, and then they're climbing at 350 for 10, 20 seconds, and that's just burning matches that you're just not getting any return on that other than a couple seconds. And the biggest thing with climbing, people think they always need to go out and ride hills. The biggest thing with riding hills that's beneficial is the shifting, learning where your shift points are. I personally never ride outside anymore unless I'm racing or if I'm on my mountain bike, but that's even rare as well. The biggest thing is getting the shifting down. Climbing and climbing fast is all power and going into kind of the watts per kilo thing. If you're lighter and you're putting out good power, you're going to climb faster. So moving over to that's just getting to some specifics for triathlon. Mountain biking, again, you're going to want to look at the course. This is where you could use that technique, doing laps on the course and seeing how fast you can go at the same power or less power, being more efficient. Road bike racing, you're really going to want to look at that course profile and see like, hey, where's the pack going to get broke up? Is there a climb? Is there a steep climb where it's really going to come down to a lot of watts per kilo and being able to do that? So you might see there's a climb that's going to be a minute. Well, you're going to probably want to work on your 1 minute power leading up to the race. Don't do that the whole time, but that's a specific demand of that course. Or if it's going to be, it's normally a colder race or hotter race. Again, this is getting to your specifics. So do this the last month or two leading up to the race, depending on what the priority of that race is. And just for health and general riding, again, you're going to kind of probably want to treat it somewhere in the mix of the triathlon or road bike. You want to be used to those conditions, but again, if you're just riding for health, you probably go closer to the triathlon method of just pacing it as best you can. All right, and last part of how do you get there? All right, work on your weaknesses. The best time to do this is actually right now in the off season. And some weaknesses might be the first weakness for most athletes is when they're starting off is their FTP. It's usually pretty low on them. I see that all the time when I'm testing athletes. They're working on actually these over here, the VO2 max, P max, FRC, when they should be working here. And then the funny thing is, if I start testing people that have been training for 3-4 years with power, their FTP is great, and then these are what they need to work on. Your FRC is a functional reserve capacity. If you're doing triathlons and stuff, it's not a huge deal, but there can be some benefits for working on that. And in road bike racing, this can be a big deal right here. This can make or break you. If you could have great endurance, a great sprint, but if you can't stay with a group on a 1 minute climb, you're going to be in some trouble, and then you're dropped. And it could be your VO2 max, and again, it could be your P max. If you can't sprint well, this is something you'd want to work on. And then last, endurance. So find out what your weakness is. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do this. Some is through the testing. Some is just looking at your data and where you're getting dropped on rides. But even triathletes could have some time where they could work on Pmax and FRC. But one of the main ones that I see a lot of experienced ones need to work on is not the FTP or endurance, but actually their VO2 max starts lacking. But I say it's different for every athlete, and what I normally see is athletes gravitate to doing the workouts that they're already really good at. And I say the winter months are a great time to work on those that you're not as good at. All right, that's the conclusion of our 3-part series here. If you want more information on coaching, we're at HoustonTriathlonCoach.com. We offer coaching, testing, VO2 max, blood lactate testing. We'll sometimes have some camps. We even put on a couple of races here. You can also reach me at benproco@hotmail.com, and we have a Facebook page that's just TriFitXT. I'm going to look at doing some more videos. I'll dictate it based on what you guys want, but some of the ideas I was having were, best upgrades you can get, kind of most bang for your buck idea, or I think that I'll do this one next, depending on what the responses are, but how to manage or avoid burnout, because we've all been there, and just staying consistent is one of the biggest things, but I'll go through some things on helping to manage and avoid that. All right, also let me know if there's any other topics you would like covered, and thank you for joining me on this 3-part Training with Power series. All right, have a good one.